The bug carving journey began with making a cylinder. I did it the same way I did all other cylinders so far, by removing the corners one at a time. This one was made using a full 2x2 block, which is so it's one of my bigger sculptures so far. And today during the editing, I did something different than usual. Usually the entire video is the same time-lapse speed all the way through, but this time I was a bit more selective, and any part that is more redundant, any part that is also somewhat good looking, at I changed the speed depending on how interesting that portion was. So for example, some of the planning stages of cuts was made faster than the actual cuts afterwards. Some I'm lacking examples right now, but so I can't say categorically that it's that speed exactly everything, but I think most of this video is time lapse at 3 times speed, with some portions all the way up to 8 times speed for portions that the movements of the knives were always slow and relatively moderate. So at what limits me going at higher speed is mostly flashing. I don't want my videos to be epilepsy hazards, so I'm trying to gauge the speed I time lapse at with that. Not that I know exactly what the limit is, but here I think I'm kind of close to the limit. Hard to say. Here to help with the cylinder, I drew a line on all sides all the way at the center of the where the block was initially. That way, when I was removing wood to do the curve on the central bits, I, I had a reference of where the line, where the curve needs to end. At least the curve on that corner. This technique went well. I don't have any complaints with how I managed to make this cylinder. I've done these kinds of cylinder quite a few times now, so I'm decently fast at it and it goes well. So, and I think I'm going to be doing a lot more of these. It's while I am carving the cylinder, it lets me think about the exact arrangement I want to make on these. So, and it lets me enter the flow of carving before I need to draw and worry about where each element goes, if it makes sense. For the drawing portion, I'm going to. I'm unsure right now because I did everything yesterday for me, but I think I show only this portion of the drawing and a bit of the detailing later for drawings because, um, well, it's repetitive, and for example, there are places where I redrew over where I already drew because it had faded with time and friction from my glove, for example. And also, I don't end up following exactly this plan. For example, there were 8 ants on a line, but I ended up thinking that it was too much and that they were too closely linked to one another, and it would be difficult for me to truly carve them how I'd planned them. So I ended up making 4 ants instead. But I made the ants bigger so that the spacing looked right to me. So this project consisted, initially the plan was 8 ants, 1 fly in a spider's web, the spider, a butterfly, and a ladybug. To help with the carving, I started by tracing a circle or an area around the insect that I wouldn't touch for now. I wanted to have the proper depth of all of the project removed before I started to mess around with the detail to hopefully prevent any breakages, which I think helped a lot. Well, maybe not help with breakage, but at least it helped with pacing myself, with mentally and physically, mostly mentally, because if I needed to start worrying about the details right then, right from the beginning, it would have been very taxing to remove that much wood while still caring about detail. Since there was an area around it where I could go basically wild, removing all of the material I wanted, this portion was fairly easy on mental stamina. I was able to go at it without much care. Well, I still had to be careful not to do anything crazy, but it was pretty painless. Doing it this way, though, did mean that every single bit of the detail work was more or less focused in the exact same session. So the session where I had to start doing the detail was a lot more intense than it probably could have been if I had done things differently there. So it's a mixed bag either way. There's no perfect method. But for this project where the details are that thin, for example, the antennas, the legs of the insects, I felt like it was necessary to split the detail work because as thin as they would end up being would make it so that any mistake would basically break the legs. So it felt worth it to fully split them. And I feel like I was right in this decision. I didn't break many legs of those insects, only a few. And now that I think about it, I think I only broke 2 legs irreparably. But one of them was on one of the ants, and it was, in my opinion, not very noticeable unless you looked for it, and all of the other ants were correct. So I didn't really. It doesn't make me mad. It's not. It doesn't disappoint me too much. That's the word I was looking for. But I did end up not doing the ladybug because, well, from the beginning, I didn't really like the way I drew it. Like I drew it from reference, and it looked. It looked to me like I drew the bug close to the reference I was using, but then it still didn't look right to me on the sentimental level. It's not what I couldn't recognize it as a ladybug at a glance, even though I'd use references. It's a weird thing. But it didn't feel right to me, and I ended up breaking one of the legs of that ladybug in a way that I felt was hard to repair. So I simply ended up removing it entirely, which I don't know if it was a good idea. I probably could have saved it, but I really didn't want to. And that may be a theme with me. Uh, there are a lot of things that I could do to save specific portions of a piece of art, but may not want to take the time to do it. This could be something to improve because desire to improve past. Had I tried to repair the ladybug, I probably would have developed my technique better than the partial giving up that I did. So it's a giving up is never ideal, but it's not the end of the world. The first insect I truly detailed was the butterfly. And here, the way I went about it is I carved away everything outside of the lines, of course. But I also wanted there to be a bit more depth, so I lowered the wings from the body by a few layers. So at the end, the body is split from the wings from the fact that they are at different depths of cuts. And I used this kind of layering for all insects to make the inside details stand out from the inside details. The results from this layering, from what I could tell from looking at the video, at least on my monitor in the box I have when editing the video, didn't look that impressive, but it felt a lot more distinct and clear when holding it physically in my hand. Um, I think the lighting, the wood reflects the lighting a bit, I think, and makes it so that some details kind of vanish when filming the process of carving. It's hard to tell. That's my impression, at least. I always feel like it's a lot less interesting to look at my sculptures from the video than the real ones. The real ones look more complete and real than what ends up on video. Even though it's the same sculpture, but the look feels different. That might also be just the fact that I am able to hold them in my hand, which gives them a level of physicality that doesn't really exist on camera. But at this point, I almost feel like I'm talking about philosophy or something, so not really the aim here. I also removed a bit of the layer of the body just to erase the stains from the lines of pencil that I spread out because of, well, me holding the block of wood and working it for. At that point, it was at least the hour mark was passed. I don't really have a way to tell exactly what time it was from looking at the edited version, at least. The second insect I made was the ladybug, and this one is the one I gave up because of the leg I broke. I was. I think the reason I gave up so quickly was because it was the first leg I broke. It was the first insect I made that had these kind of legs, and I don't know. It must have felt worse than if it was the ant or something. Because then here here I'm removing the ladybug. Because then when I went to do the ants and I broke one of the ant's legs, it didn't feel as bad because at that point I'd already made the spider and the spider looked great. So I didn't feel the same pressure, I think, is how I would describe it, to make it perfect. So, and there were also three other ants to make, so I felt like I had other chances and better in contrast, and I could say, oh well, this specific ant, well, what is wounded from a battle or something. So it didn't feel as dramatic as the failure on the ladybug, which is kind of silly. Both are on the same piece, both are on the same, made by something. It's a bit silly to consider it this way, but I think that's what happened in my head. Not, I don't think I described it that way at the time. I'm just my retrospective. That's how I feel it went. Maybe. In the case of the spider, now that I think about it, I did break one of the legs at some point, but it ended up not being that much of a problem because I had dug deeper around the spider than I did with other insects. I think other bugs. I think that was because I initially wanted to make the backside, the body of the spider a lot more rounded. I ended up not doing that, mostly because I forgot, I think, because the initial carving of the depth around the insects was made 1 week prior to the most of the rest of the plan. So, for example, the stream changed. The moment I removed the ladybug fully is the moment the stream for the second session started, the second stream. So, to give an idea. So at this point, I had forgot a bit of the process and the thinking behind the different depths around the insects. So I missed a bit of an opportunity there. But but then when I broke one of the leg, the fact that there was this additional depth that I could tap into made it so I could still have the leg just a bit lower without it clashing too much, in my opinion, with the rest. So it still was a very readable spider. The most difficult portion of the spider was the portion that has the fly near it. I hadn't thought of that when I was doing the planning, but the spider being the fly being this close to the spider made it an an obstacle when trying to carve last the space between the last two legs and the body, the final portion of the body of the spider. It was a bit annoying, but doable. Well, annoying isn't really the word I'm looking for. It's more finicky. It took more effort and more a much more focused approach than the other legs, which still required a lot of focus. So here I'm removing layers of the legs to split them from the body. And I also made a line in between the two portions of the body of the spider to make them pop out more. Same thing with the fly, which the fly was really an afterthought in terms of details. It's just the 2D form of basically just the body, the head, and two wings without any care for the legs and the scale. And here I'm doing the ants, or starting them. This first one is the one with that has a leg missing by the end. Mostly because I misspaced the drawing in the initial drawing. I think more than the actual problems. Like I didn't leave myself enough room for all three legs on one side, which hurt me when trying to do the legs. But the other ones ended up being more reasonably spaced, so it was very doable for the other ones. Whenever I was in between two ends, I'd remove all the material in between the two ends in one go in a square formation, so that I didn't have to care about the details of two ants at the same time. I could focus on just one ant, finish it, then go to the next one. I didn't want to start my cut with a detailed position of the knife and also end it with a detailed position of the knife to just save myself some mental effort, well, and also physical. It would require a level of dexterity I'm not confident I have right now. Also, the drawing right now, drawings I use as a shape for as a planned shape for an ant doesn't really look at it like an ant because for the legs I didn't draw all three legs. It felt like a waste of time to do so, so I only did a rounded, squarish, maybe fanned out formation that I could remove and then later detail into legs. I basically made the outside perimeter of the legs and then made the detail of the legs. And also I did that for the mandibles because at the planning stage, at that point, I didn't really know how well I'd be able to do the legs and how well I would be able to do the legs. So it felt a bit putting the cart before the bull. It felt too early to plan every single detail from the very beginning because things are bound to change at some point. So to save myself some trouble, I simplified and made the outsides. Only the outlines of where things would go, basically. Every ant went through the exact same process. First, all of the outline is removed. Then the legs. Before I detail the legs, I remove a layer from the legs so that they are already at their final depth before I start removing them. That's because when doing the spider, where I'd carve away the perimeter of the legs before uh, having them reach the final depth, it felt to me like they were too fragile for this order, that it would be at any point I was movements away from breaking the spider's legs. So for the ants, I made them reach their final depth, which would mean that they weren't as fragile as I was working them, and reduce the risk of breaking the legs. I feel like it worked. Hard to say because I didn't try both techniques on the ants. I tried the one that felt good, felt correct. And then after all the legs were removed, were detailed, I did do just a notch on the shape I'd left for the mandibles to split them. Or sometimes I did the notches on the mandibles earlier. But and then once all of these details are made, I'd remove a layer from the body, split the body sections, and reduce the height of the antennas, heads, and so forth. Here, for a portion of the ant making process, I held the wood a lot closer to my face, and thus the camera, because I was really. I felt like I had better control of what I was doing. The details were so small that I felt like I was working blind from that far back. Well, not. I say that like it was a kilometer away, but it wasn't that dramatic of a change. But it did feel like it helped with making the legs. Also, you get to see the process of making the legs a bit easier than otherwise. So, win-win if you're asking me. One of the problem I saw with making these ants is that by the time I was at the fourth one, I was really tired of making the ants. It was it had become a repetitive process that was not as fun as it was at the beginning. So definitely something to keep in mind for the future. Don't carve anything too repetitive because I get tired of it and bored, which well is normal, but given that there were only 4 ants, I feel like I got tired of it kind of quickly, especially because I like ants. But might just be because of the fact that the legs were kind of tedious to make. So repetitive tediousness, I'm not that surprised that I ended up tired of it. I say that like it was horrible to make, but it wasn't that bad. It was just not the best. The portion of the end that was at the edge was surprisingly hard to make. Uh, I don't know, the wood was not weaker, but it was more. The knife and often went deeper into the wood than I would have liked it to, and things of that nature. It was not difficult, it was just different. And well, at that point, I was well into. I'd spent a lot of time on this project, and I was getting tired of carving, so the difference made it that much more difficult for the last end. And after the ant was done, was time for wood burning. More details and make had that big pop of a color. Uh, I traced most of what I wanted to do before I started wood burning, but you'll see once the final ant is done that I only left a very small portion of the drawing of the planning phase of the wood burning. That's because most of it was basically boring. But I felt like the process of tracing and planning the spider's web was fun to watch a bit more than the rest of the tracing. And well, anyway, once I start wood burning, all of the lines I trace are traced directly over, so it's not a there's not a lot of loss from me not showing the drawing process and planning process of the wood burning. Except for the spider's web, which I felt was a more interesting pattern and more interesting shape. So you can see I started with 4 cardinal points and then points in between the cardinal ones, and I just tied them with arcs. And then all the corners were pointed towards the center and towards its opposite. And then I went along the line connecting all the lines with arcs once again, going towards the center. Which isn't really. It's the simplified spider's web, the classic one that everyone knows. But it's efficient. Where the ladybug was, for there to not be a strange void, I added a leaf, and another leaf a bit further away. That way it feels more alive. Although there are already all those insects, it felt right to add a leaf there. I added a bit of a pattern to the butterfly. You'll see me go back and fill in those ovals later. I ended up thinking that since the dots were filled, it made more sense visually to me if those ovals also were filled. So I come back later when I'm certain of my decision. Other than that, I did eyes for all of the insects. I did a bit of a pattern on the wings of the fly, but it was more a few lines just to get a texture. It was really simple for the fly. I didn't really spend much time on it. When looking at the final product, at least to me, it's really apparent that the fly was more or less an afterthought, and there's clearly less effort on that. The show of this area of the piece is really stolen by the big spider. I don't like this second leaf quite as much as I like the first one. It's not. I feel like I made it too small. I think that's mostly the problem I have with it. Because they're using the same techniques, both of them, and so are basically the same shape more or less. So there's no reason to like one more than the other except the size, I think. So that's probably it. And with that, the project is over. I'm going to thank you all for watching, and feel free to come by whenever you want. Bye.